You look beautiful tonight, Eleanor. Have I told you that already? She smiled across the white tablecloth, candlelight catching the diamond earrings he had given her last Christmas. The restaurant hummed with quiet conversation and the soft clink of expensive silverware. Anniversary dinner. 2 years married. She should have felt grateful. She should have felt at peace. Instead, she felt tired in a way she could not name. You've told me twice, she said. But I don't mind hearing it again. Harrison reached across the table and covered her hand with his. His fingers were warm, his grip gentle but certain. The grip of a man who knew exactly what he wanted and how to get it. I mean it. When I walked into that gallery opening and saw you standing there, I knew my life was about to change. Eleanor remembered that night. 3 years ago, 6 months after her father's funeral. She had been standing in front of a glass sculpture, trying not to cry, trying to pretend she was there for art and not just to escape the empty house where every room reminded her of what she had lost. Harrison had appeared beside her like an answer to a prayer she had not spoken aloud. Her phone buzzed against the tablecloth. She glanced down automatically, expecting a work notification, a reminder she had forgotten to disable. But the number on the screen was unfamiliar, and the message preview showed words that made her blood freeze in her veins. Go now. Don't tell him anything. Welcome back to another powerful story, my beloved listeners. Kindly tell me where you are watching from and what time it is where you are at. If you are new here, prepare for a story of betrayal, unexpected love, and what truly makes a family. Drop everything and listen closely. This tale of heartbreak and redemption might just change how you view love and family forever. Eleanor stared at her phone. The words glowed against the dark screen, impossible and urgent. Go now. Don't tell him anything. Everything all right, darling? Harrison's voice cut through her paralysis. She looked up to find him watching her with those attentive brown eyes, the slight furrow of concern between his brows that she had once found so endearing. Fine. The word came out too quickly. She forced her fingers to relax around the phone. Just a work email. Nothing that cannot wait. She set the phone face down on the tablecloth, but she could feel it there like a living thing, pulsing with warning. Harrison smiled and returned to his meal. Prime rib, medium rare, exactly how he always ordered it. He was a man of precise habits, of carefully maintained routines. She had found comfort in that predictability after the chaos of grief. Now, with those 6 words burning in her mind, she wondered what else that precision might mean. Her phone buzzed again. This time she did not look immediately. She lifted her wine glass and took a careful sip, watching Harrison over the rim. He was cutting his steak with the focused attention he brought to everything, each movement economical and deliberate. The Henderson account came through today, he said, not looking up. That puts us ahead of projections for the quarter. Us. Our projections. He spoke about her father's company as if it had always been his. As if the 3 generations of Mercer craftsmen who had built it from nothing were merely a prelude to his arrival. When had she started noticing these small erasures? That's wonderful news, she said. Her phone buzzed a 3rd time. Someone certainly wants your attention, Harrison observed. There was something in his voice now, a slight edge beneath the pleasant concern. Are you sure everything is all right? Eleanor picked up the phone. 3 messages from the same unknown number. Go now. Don't tell him anything. I know we have not spoken. I know you are angry. But I hired someone. He has done this before. Other women. They lost everything. Please, Eleanor. Leave now. Come to me. The words blurred and sharpened. Other women. They lost everything. She thought about the documents Harrison had asked her to sign last week. Routine paperwork, he had said. Consolidation of accounts for tax purposes. She had signed without reading carefully, trusting his expertise, grateful that someone else was handling the complexity. Eleanor. She looked up. Harrison was watching her with an expression she could not quite read. Concern. Yes. But something else beneath it. Something calculating. I think I am getting a migraine, she said. The lie came easily, smoothly, as if some part of her had already decided what to do. The flickering candles. Perhaps. I should probably go home and rest. Harrison immediately began to rise. I will take you. We can have them wrap up the food. No. The word came out sharper than she intended. She softened it with a smile. No, darling, please. Stay and finish your dinner. There is no reason for both of us to have our evening ruined. He hesitated. She could see him weighing options, running calculations behind those warm brown eyes. I do not like you driving when you are not feeling well. I will take a car. One of the services. She was already gathering her purse, her movements calm despite the panic hammering in her chest. Please, Harrison. Enjoy your meal. I will text you when I am home. She stood and walked around the table to kiss his cheek. His skin was smooth beneath her lips, faintly scented with the cologne she had bought him last month. The cologne he wore because she had chosen it. How much of their life together was real? How much was performance? I love you, she said, because she had said it every night for 2 years, and stopping now would tell him something was wrong. I love you too, sweetheart. He caught her hand and squeezed it gently. Feel better. I will be home soon. She walked out of the restaurant with her head high and her shoulders straight, just another well-dressed woman leaving a nice dinner early. The hostess smiled and wished her a good evening. A waiter held the door. Outside, the autumn air hit her face like cold water. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment, breathing deeply, trying to organize the chaos in her mind. Then she opened her phone and called the unknown number. It rang twice before a voice answered. A voice she had not heard in more than 2 years. A voice that belonged to her mother. Eleanor. Vivian Mercer sounded older than Eleanor remembered. Frailer. But there was iron beneath the frailty. Thank God. Are you out of the restaurant? Mother. Eleanor's voice cracked on the word. What is happening? What do you mean, other women? Not over the phone. Come to me. I will explain everything. A pause. Eleanor, I know I have no right to ask you for anything. I know what I said after your father's funeral was unforgivable. But please. I need you to trust me one more time. Eleanor thought about the bitter fight that had ended their relationship. The accusations Vivian had hurled about the inheritance, about Eleanor caring more about money than family. The terrible things Eleanor had said in return. 2 years of silence. 2 years of holidays spent with Harrison instead of her mother. 2 years of telling herself it was better this way. Send me your address, Eleanor said quietly. I am coming. The assisted living facility where Vivian now resided was 40 minutes from the restaurant, in a quiet suburb Eleanor had never had reason to visit. She sat in the back of the car she had ordered, watching the city lights give way to residential darkness, her mind churning. Her phone buzzed with a text from Harrison. Home safe, sweetheart? Let me know how you are feeling. She typed back quickly. Just arrived. Going straight to bed. Enjoy the rest of your evening. A moment later, his response. Rest well, my love. I will check on you when I get home. Such a caring husband. Such a devoted partner. Other women. They lost everything. Eleanor pressed her forehead against the cold window and watched the unfamiliar streets roll past. Vivian was waiting in the lobby when Eleanor arrived. She looked smaller than Eleanor remembered, her white hair thinner, her hands spotted with age. But her eyes were still sharp, still the same piercing blue that had intimidated Eleanor throughout her childhood. Eleanor. Vivian reached for her, then hesitated, as if unsure whether her touch would be welcome. Eleanor closed the distance between them and wrapped her arms around her mother. Vivian felt fragile, breakable, nothing like the formidable woman who had helped run Mercer Artisan Glass for 4 decades. I am so sorry, Vivian whispered into her hair. For what I said. For staying away. For not being there when you needed me. Later. Eleanor pulled back, wiping her eyes. You can apologize later. Right now, I need to know what is happening. They went to Vivian's apartment, a small but comfortable suite on the 3rd floor. The space was filled with familiar objects from Eleanor's childhood home, photographs and books, and the small glass bird her father had made for Vivian on their wedding anniversary. Spread across the dining table was something else entirely. Folders. Photographs. Printouts of financial documents. The evidence of months of careful investigation. How did you know? Eleanor asked, staring at the papers. I never trusted him. Vivian lowered herself into a chair with careful movements. From the moment I met Harrison at your wedding, something felt wrong. Too smooth, too perfect, too attentive. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself I was just a bitter old woman who could not accept that her daughter had moved on. You said terrible things to me at the reception. I know. Vivian's voice was heavy with regret. I was grieving your father badly, and I was angry at the world, and I took it out on you. But Eleanor, my instincts were right. I just went about it in the worst possible way. Eleanor sat down across from her mother, her eyes moving over the scattered documents. What did you find? 6 months ago, I hired a private investigator. A woman named Sandra Okonkwo. She was expensive, but thorough. Vivian slid a folder across the table. Harrison Drake does not exist. Eleanor opened the folder. Inside was a photograph of Harrison, younger but unmistakable, alongside identification documents that bore a different name. Harold Decker. His real name is Harold Decker, Vivian continued. He grew up in Ohio. His father worked in a factory. His mother was a bookkeeper. There is no shipping fortune, no old family money, no sophisticated investor background. The room seemed to tilt. Eleanor gripped the edge of the table. This could be a mistake. Someone with similar features. It is not a mistake. Sandra spent months confirming everything. Vivian pulled out another folder, heavier than the first. Eleanor, you are not the first woman he has targeted. She spread photographs across the table. Women. Different ages, different backgrounds, but all of them shared something in common. A certain look in their eyes, a vulnerability that was visible even in formal photographs. Margaret Holloway, Vivian said, pointing to the first picture. She owned a vineyard in Virginia that had been in her family for 3 generations. Harrison, or Harold as he was calling himself then, married her 4 years ago. Within 2 years, he had transferred the entire property into a holding company she did not control. She lost everything. Eleanor stared at Margaret's face. A woman in her early 60s, grey-haired, dignified. A woman who had probably thought she was building a future with a loving partner. Rachel Ostrowski. Vivian moved to the next photograph. Cattle ranch in Colorado. $8 million in assets. Same pattern. He appeared during a difficult time, made himself indispensable, married her quickly, and then systematically dismantled her estate. How is this possible? Eleanor's voice sounded strange to her own ears. How can someone do this repeatedly without being caught? Because his victims are ashamed. Vivian's voice was gentle but unflinching. Because the documentation looks legitimate. Because by the time they understand what has happened, they have no resources left to fight. And because people do not believe that a charming, sophisticated man could be a predator. There was a third photograph on the table. Eleanor did not want to look at it, but she could not look away. Diane Pescator. Vivian's voice dropped. New Hampshire. Lost her late husband's construction company. Harrison cleaned her out completely. She had nothing left. Eleanor waited for the rest. Diane took her own life 18 months after losing everything. Her family believes Harrison bears responsibility, but they could never prove it legally. The words hung in the air between them. Eleanor thought about the woman in the photograph. The soft smile. The hopeful eyes. A woman who had trusted the wrong person and paid with her life. I could have been her, Eleanor said quietly. Not could have been. You still could be. Vivian reached across the table and took her daughter's hand. Eleanor, Sandra has been monitoring Harrison's communications. Tonight was supposed to be significant. What do you mean? He was planning to drug you. Something in your wine that would make you confused, compliant. He was going to take you to meet with his associates after dinner. There would be documents to sign. By morning, you would have signed away control of Mercer Artisan Glass. Eleanor remembered Harrison ordering wine for both of them when they arrived. The way he had smiled when the waiter poured. The way he had watched her take her first sip. I only drank a little. I was too nervous. Thank God for that. There was a knock at the apartment door. Vivian rose slowly to answer it, and Eleanor heard the low murmur of voices before another woman entered the room. Sandra Okonkwo was perhaps 50, with close-cropped grey hair and an intensity of focus that made her seem larger than her actual height. She carried a laptop bag and a file box, setting both on the table with the efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. "Mrs. Mercer." She nodded at Eleanor. "I am glad you listened to your mother. Many people do not." "Tell her the rest," Vivian said. "Tell her about Gerald." Eleanor felt the floor shift beneath her. "What about my father?" Sandra opened her laptop and pulled up a series of documents. "Your father died 2.5 years ago. Heart attack in his workshop. He was 79 years old and had a documented heart condition. The death was ruled natural causes." "I know how my father died." "Yes. But do you know what he was doing in the weeks before his death?" Eleanor shook her head, dread pooling in her stomach. 3 weeks before he collapsed, Gerald Mercer contacted a forensic accountant. He had noticed irregularities in the company books. Small discrepancies that did not add up. He was concerned that someone was manipulating the financial records. "My father never mentioned anything like that to me." "He may not have wanted to worry you until he had proof." Sandra pulled up another document. The forensic accountant he contacted never received any files. Gerald died before he could send them. Eleanor thought about her father in his final weeks. Distracted. Worried. She had attributed it to age, to the natural anxieties of a man approaching 80. She had told herself he was fine. "You think someone was stealing from the company before my father died?" Sandra hesitated. "I think it is possible that your father was under significant stress from financial irregularities he could not explain. And I think it is possible that stress contributed to his cardiac event." The implications settled over Eleanor like ice water. "Harrison did not know my father. They never met." Sandra turned her laptop screen toward Eleanor. On it was a photograph from an industry conference 3 years ago. Her father stood in the center of a group, shaking hands with a supplier Eleanor vaguely recognized. And there, in the background, barely visible but unmistakable, was Harrison. Younger. Different haircut. But the same face. The same attentive eyes. "He was there," Eleanor breathed. "Harrison had been watching your family for months before your father died. Studying the business. Identifying vulnerabilities." Sandra's voice was clinical, detached. The voice of someone who delivered terrible news regularly. "I cannot prove he did anything to cause your father's death. But I can tell you that he positioned himself very carefully to be in the right place when you were at your most vulnerable." Eleanor stood abruptly. She walked to the window and stared out at the darkness, her reflection ghost-like in the glass. Her father. The man who had taught her to love the beauty of molten glass transforming into art. The man who had built his company from nothing and dreamed of passing it to her. The man whose heart had given out in the workshop where he had spent his life. Had Harrison killed him? Not with violence, not with poison, but with the slow, careful application of stress? With the manipulation of accounts designed to confuse and frighten an elderly man? "Eleanor." Her mother's voice was gentle. "I know this is overwhelming. He has been in my bed for 2 years." Eleanor did not turn from the window. "I have kissed him good morning and good night. I have told him I loved him. I have trusted him with everything my father built." "You did not know." "I should have known." The anger in her voice surprised her. It felt clean somehow, clearer than grief. "I should have asked questions. I should have paid attention to my own business instead of letting him handle everything." "He is very good at what he does," Sandra said. "He has been perfecting this operation for more than a decade. You are not foolish for being deceived. You are a victim of a professional predator." Eleanor finally turned to face them. Her mother sat at the table, looking small and tired. Sandra stood with her arms crossed, watching Eleanor with an expression that might have been respect. "What do we do now?" Sandra's eyebrows rose slightly. I am not going to let him get away with this. I am not going to let him do to anyone else what he did to Margaret and Rachel and Diane." Eleanor walked back to the table and looked down at the photographs. I'm not going to let him walk away with my father's company. Vivian and Sandra exchanged a glance. There are legal options, Sandra said carefully. Freezing assets, filing fraud charges. But Harrison has done this before, and he has always escaped consequences. His documentation is excellent. His partners are professionals. Partners. Sandra pulled out more documents. A disbarred attorney named Curtis Webb handles the forged paperwork. A financial consultant named Pamela Reese manages the shell companies that receive the stolen assets. They have worked together for years. Eleanor studied the faces in the photographs. Curtis Webb was a heavy-set man in his 50s with thinning hair and the bland expression of someone who spent his life in paperwork. Pamela Reese was elegant, professional, the kind of woman you would trust instinctively. So this is not just Harrison. This is an organization. An organization that has destroyed at least 6 women that we know of. Probably more that we have not found yet. Eleanor thought about her father's workshop. The furnaces and tools that had shaped beauty from raw materials for 3 generations. The skilled craftspeople who depended on Mercer artisan glass for their livelihoods. The legacy she had nearly signed away because she was too grateful for help to question where it came from. I want to take him down, she said. Not just legally. I want to make sure he can never do this again. Sandra studied her for a long moment. That will require you to do something very difficult. What? You will have to go back to him. You will have to pretend nothing has changed. You will have to perform the role of devoted wife while we gather the evidence we need to destroy his operation completely. Eleanor thought about Harrison waiting for her at home. The concerned texts. The gentle questions. The warm body beside her in bed. The man who might have killed her father. I can do it. Are you certain? This will take time. Weeks, possibly months. You will have to watch him lie to you every day and smile as if you believe him. Eleanor looked at her mother. Vivian's eyes were bright with tears, but there was pride there too. Pride and something that looked almost like hope. My father built something beautiful, Eleanor said. He taught me that the most valuable things require patience and precision. He taught me that you cannot rush the transformation of raw materials into art. She picked up one of the photographs of Harrison. Harold. Whatever his real name was. The charming smile, the attentive eyes, the perfect performance of a devoted husband. I'm going to take my time, she said. And I am going to do this right. 3 days later, Eleanor sat across from Walter Hennessy in his living room. The old attorney looked grayer than she remembered, his movement slower, but his mind was still sharp enough to process the document Sandra had provided. Your father suspected something, Walter said quietly, setting down the last page. He called me 2 weeks before he died. Said something felt wrong with the accounts. I told him he was probably just tired, that he should let the younger staff handle the details. You could not have known. No. But I should have listened. Walter removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. Gerald Mercer was the most careful man I ever knew. If he said something was wrong, something was wrong. Can we stop Harrison? Walter was quiet for a long moment. The fraud is clear. The forgeries are provable. But convicting someone like this, someone with resources and sophisticated legal support, that requires more than evidence. It requires him to make a mistake. What kind of mistake? The kind where he thinks he is winning right up until the moment he loses. Walter leaned forward. Eleanor, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Of course. Can you do this? Can you go home to that man and pretend you still trust him? Can you watch him manipulate you and smile as if nothing is wrong? Eleanor thought about the past 3 days. The careful performance she had maintained. Harrison bringing her tea when she claimed her migraine was lingering. Harrison rubbing her shoulders when she pretended to be stressed about work. Harrison whispering that he loved her as they fell asleep. Each touch made her skin crawl. Each word made her stomach turn. But she had smiled, and agreed, and played her part with a precision she had not known she possessed. I have been doing it for 3 days already, she said. I can keep doing it for as long as necessary. Walter nodded slowly. Then we begin. I will file emergency motions to protect your assets. Sandra will continue her surveillance. And you will continue to be the devoted wife Harrison believes you are. What happens when he realizes his accounts are frozen? He will panic. He will make mistakes. And we will be watching. Walter placed his hand over hers. Your father would be proud of you, Eleanor. What you are doing takes extraordinary courage. Eleanor thought about her father in his workshop, surrounded by the glass he loved. She thought about his careful hands shaping beauty from chaos. She thought about the legacy he had entrusted to her. I am doing what he taught me, she said. I am being patient. I am being precise. And I am going to finish what he started. A week passed. Then 2. Eleanor moved through her days like a woman walking on ice, every step careful, every word measured. Harrison suspected nothing. Or if he suspected, he hid it well. She watched him more carefully now, seeing things she had missed before. The way his phone conversations went silent when she entered a room. The way he deflected questions about specific business decisions. The way his eyes sometimes tracked her movements with a calculation that had nothing to do with love. He brought her flowers. He made dinner reservations. He told her stories about his childhood that she now knew were fabrications. And she smiled and nodded, and played the part of the grateful wife who could not imagine life without him. Sandra provided regular updates through a secure channel. Harrison's partners were being tracked. Assets were being traced through layers of shell companies. The network was larger than they had initially suspected, reaching across 6 states and possibly into international accounts. He is getting nervous, Sandra reported during one of their clandestine meetings. His communication patterns have changed. He is making more calls to Curtis Webb and Pamela Reese. Does he know about the asset freezes? Not yet. We have been careful to make it look like routine banking delays. But he will figure it out soon, and when he does, he will either run or escalate. What does escalation look like? Sandra hesitated. He may try to accelerate his timeline. Get you to sign documents before you have time to read them carefully. He may create a crisis that requires immediate financial decisions. Eleanor thought about Harrison's behavior over the past few days. Slightly more attentive than usual. Slightly more solicitous. As if he was preparing for something. There is one more thing, Sandra said. I found another victim. Who? A woman named Gloria Patterson from Vermont. She owned a chain of successful bakeries. Harrison targeted her about 8 years ago, early in his operation. Sandra pulled out a photograph. She is the only one who fought back. The woman in the picture was perhaps 65, with steel-grey hair and a determined set to her jaw. What happened? She realized something was wrong before Harrison could complete the transfer. She went to the police, hired lawyers, fought him in court for 2 years. Sandra's voice was heavy. She won, eventually. But the legal fees bankrupted her anyway. She lost the bakeries and most of her savings. Last I heard, she was living with her daughter in Boston. Eleanor studied the photograph. Gloria Patterson had survived, but at terrible cost. Fighting Harrison through conventional means had still destroyed her life. There has to be another way, Eleanor said. Something that does not drag on for years. Something that ends this permanently. There might be. Sandra pulled out another folder. I have been in contact with the FBI White-Collar Crimes Division. They are very interested in Harrison's operation. If we can get him to make direct admissions, to confirm his real identity and acknowledge the fraud on record, they can move faster. How do we get him to admit anything? Sandra was quiet for a moment. We let him think he is still winning. And then, at exactly the right moment, we confront him. You mean I confront him? Yes. You, wearing a wire, in a controlled environment, with federal agents ready to move. You will be protected. But you will need to make him talk. Eleanor thought about facing Harrison, looking into those brown eyes and telling him she knew everything. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like relief. When? Soon. We are almost ready. Sandra reached across and squeezed her hand. You are doing remarkably well, Mrs. Mercer. Most people could not maintain this kind of performance under this kind of pressure. I'm not performing, Eleanor said quietly. I am surviving. That night, Eleanor lay in bed beside Harrison, listening to his slow, steady breathing. Moonlight filtered through the curtains, illuminating his face in soft silver. He looked peaceful, innocent. The face of a man with nothing to hide and nothing to fear. She thought about Diane Pescator, who had seen no way forward. She thought about Gloria Patterson, who had fought and won and lost everything anyway. She thought about Margaret and Rachel and all the other women whose names she might never know. Harrison shifted in his sleep, his hand reaching for her automatically. Even unconscious, he maintained the performance of devotion. Eleanor let his hand rest on hers. She kept her breathing steady, her body relaxed. She had become very good at pretending. But soon she would not have to pretend anymore. 3 weeks after the anniversary dinner, Harrison came home early. Eleanor was in the study, reviewing documents Walter had sent her, when she heard his car in the driveway. She quickly closed the files and switched to an innocent browser window, her heart racing. He walked in looking distracted, his phone pressed to his ear. I understand there is an issue, but these delays are unacceptable. We have a timeline. He glanced at Eleanor, held up one finger in apology, and walked toward his office. She heard the door close, heard his voice continue in urgent, muffled tones. Something had changed. She could feel it. She texted Sandra. Home early. Agitated. Making calls. The response came quickly. Stay calm. Continue normal routine. We are monitoring. 20 minutes later, Harrison emerged from his office. His smile was back in place, but there was tension around his eyes that had not been there that morning. Sorry about that, darling. Business complications. Anything I can help with? Nothing for you to worry about. He crossed the room and kissed her forehead. Actually, I was hoping we could go away this weekend. The lake house. Just the two of us. The lake house. Isolated, private, far from anyone who might interrupt. Eleanor felt cold creep up her spine. That sounds lovely, she said carefully. But I have meetings on Monday that I cannot reschedule. Cancel them. This is more important. There was an edge to his voice now, a pressure that he usually hid better. Whatever had happened in his office had unsettled him. Harrison, what is going on? He smiled, but the smile did not reach his eyes. Nothing serious. Just some banking irregularities that need to be sorted out. I may need you to sign a few documents while we are at the lake house. Nothing complicated, just authorization forms to release some frozen funds. Frozen funds. He knew. Of course, Eleanor said. Whatever you need. He relaxed slightly, the tension in his shoulders easing. That is why I love you, darling. You make everything so easy. Easy. That was what she had always been to him. Easy to charm, easy to control, easy to rob. Not anymore. She texted Sandra again after Harrison went to shower. He knows about the freezes. Wants to take me to Lake House this weekend. Asking me to sign documents. Sandra's response was immediate. Do not go. He is accelerating timeline. Confrontation must happen sooner than planned. Meeting with Walter and federal prosecutor tomorrow morning. Make excuse for why you cannot leave town. Eleanor stared at the phone, her mind racing. She had been preparing for this moment for weeks, but now that it was approaching, the reality of it pressed against her chest. She was going to face Harrison. She was going to tell him she knew everything. And she was going to watch the mask fall away from the man she had shared her life with for 2 years. Harrison emerged from the bathroom in a robe, toweling his hair. Have you thought about what to pack? It might be cold at the lake this time of year. Actually, I just realized I have a conflict. The certification meeting with the state board. I cannot miss it. His expression flickered. Just for a moment, something cold and calculating surfaced before disappearing behind the concerned husband mask. Can't someone else handle it? I am afraid not. I am the only authorized representative for Mercer Artisan Glass. She smiled, keeping her voice light. But we could go the following weekend. I will make sure my schedule is completely clear. Harrison studied her for a long moment. She held his gaze steadily, letting him see only what she wanted him to see. The devoted wife. The trusting partner. The easy mark. "Of course," he said finally. "Next weekend it is." But something had shifted between them. Some invisible wire had been tripped. And as Eleanor smiled and began discussing dinner plans, she knew that the endgame was approaching faster than either of them had anticipated. The meeting with the federal prosecutor took place at Walter's home the next morning. Elise Channing was a sharp-featured woman in her 40s with the focused intensity of someone who had spent her career pursuing financial criminals. "Mrs. Mercer," she said, shaking Eleanor's hand firmly, "I have reviewed the evidence your investigator has compiled. It is impressive work. Impressive enough to convict Harrison. Impressive enough to build a strong case, yes. But men like Harold Decker know how to protect themselves. The documentation trail is deliberately confusing, the shell companies are layered deep, and his partners are disciplined about communication." Channing spread her hands. "What we need is him, on record, confirming his real identity and acknowledging the fraud. You want me to get him to confess. I want you to have a conversation with him in a controlled environment while wearing recording equipment. You will not be alone. We will have agents positioned nearby, ready to intervene if anything goes wrong." Channing's voice was steady but serious. "I will not pretend there is no risk. Harrison is desperate. Desperate men can become dangerous." Eleanor thought about the lake house invitation. The pressure in Harrison's voice. The calculation in his eyes. "When do we do this?" "We were planning for next week. But given what you reported last night, we may need to move faster." Channing looked at Walter. "Can your legal filings be expedited? I can have emergency injunctions filed by tomorrow afternoon. Every account Harrison has access to will be frozen by end of business." "Good. That should force his hand. He will either try to run, in which case we arrest him, or he will try to pressure Mrs. Mercer into signing documents, in which case we record everything." Sandra spoke up. "He asked her to go to the lake house this weekend. Isolated location, no witnesses. I think he was planning something." Channing nodded slowly. "He may try to recreate that scenario before the weekend. Mrs. Mercer, you need to be prepared for him to suggest meetings with lawyers, business consultations, anything that might get you alone with documents to sign." "I understand. And you need to be prepared for the confrontation itself. When you tell him you know the truth, he will try to manipulate you. He will claim misunderstanding, declare his love, possibly become aggressive." Channing's eyes were steady on Eleanor's. "You will need to stay calm no matter what he says. Keep him talking. Get him to explain his operation. The more he says, the stronger our case becomes." Eleanor thought about all the times Harrison had talked to her. The stories about his family, his childhood, his dreams. All lies, but delivered with such conviction that she had never questioned them. Now she would make him tell the truth. "I can do it," she said. The next 2 days were the longest of Eleanor's life. She went through the motions of her routine, attending meetings, reviewing documents, managing the business her father had built. But underneath the ordinary activities, she was preparing for war. Harrison grew more agitated as the hours passed. He spent long periods in his office, his voice rising and falling behind the closed door. He checked his phone constantly. He looked at Eleanor with an expression she could not quite read. On Friday evening, his composure finally cracked. Eleanor was in the kitchen, preparing dinner, when he stormed through the door with his face twisted in fury. "What have you done?" She turned, keeping her movements calm despite her hammering heart. "What do you mean?" "The accounts. All of them frozen. Every transfer blocked." He advanced toward her, his fists clenched at his sides. "This did not happen by accident, Eleanor. Someone filed legal motions. Someone with access to our financial information." This was the moment. The confrontation she had been preparing for. But it was happening too fast, before the agents were in position, before she had the wire in place. "Harrison, I do not know what you are talking about. Do not lie to me." His voice dropped to something cold and dangerous. "I have spent 2 years with you, Eleanor. I know when you are hiding something." She backed against the counter, fear rising in her throat. But mixed with the fear was anger, clean and bright and strong. You want to talk about lying? She heard her own voice as if from a distance. You want to talk about hiding things? What does that mean? It means I know, Harrison. Or should I call you Harold? Harold Decker from Ohio. The transformation was instantaneous. The charming husband, the devoted partner, the warm and caring man she thought she had married, all of it vanished as if wiped away by an invisible hand. What remained was someone else entirely. Someone cold and calculating and utterly without remorse. Your mother, Harrison said quietly. That interfering old woman. I should have dealt with her years ago. You stay away from my mother. Or what? He smiled, and the smile was nothing like the one she had fallen in love with. What are you going to do, Eleanor? Call the police? Hire lawyers? I have been doing this for 15 years. Women like you come and go, but I always come out ahead. Not this time. This time. He laughed, a harsh and ugly sound. You think you are different? You think you are special? You are exactly like all the others. Lonely, grieving, desperate for someone to take care of you. I could see it the moment I met you. Eleanor's phone was in her pocket. She had managed to send an emergency signal when Harrison first started yelling, but she did not know if anyone had received it. She needed to keep him talking. Tell me about the others, she said. Margaret. Rachel. Diane. Something flickered in his eyes at Diane's name. You have been busy. I know you destroyed them. I know Diane killed herself because of you. Diane was weak. They were all weak. He took a step toward her. Just like you. Just like your father. The mention of her father hit her like a physical blow. What did you do to him? I did not touch him. Harrison's voice was almost conversational now, as if discussing the weather. I just helped things along. A few discrepancies in the accounts. A few late-night phone calls from concerned investors. Elderly men with heart conditions should not be put under that kind of stress. You killed him. I created circumstances. What his body did with those circumstances was his own affair. He smiled. He was a complication, Eleanor. I needed him out of the way to get to you. She felt tears streaming down her face, but her voice stayed steady. And the others? The women you destroyed? Business. He shrugged. They had something I wanted. I took it. That is how the world works. You are a monster. I am a realist. You were born into money, Eleanor. You have no idea what it takes for the rest of us to survive. I grew up watching rich people throw away opportunities that would have changed my life. Why should you have everything just because your grandfather knew how to blow glass? He spread his hands. I am just redistributing wealth. You are stealing. You are destroying lives. I am taking what I deserve. His voice hardened. Now. You are going to call your mother and find out exactly what she knows. Then you are going to call your lawyer and have those injunctions lifted. And then we are going to go to the lake house and finish what we started. Or what? Harrison moved fast, too fast. His hand closed around her wrist hard enough to bruise. Or I will show you what happens to women who try to outsmart me. The front door burst open. Sandra entered first, followed by two federal agents with weapons drawn. Harrison released Eleanor's wrist and stepped back, his expression cycling through surprise and calculation and finally a kind of resigned fury. Harold Decker, you are under arrest for wire fraud, identity theft, and racketeering. The lead agent moved forward with handcuffs. You have the right to remain silent. This is ridiculous. Harrison's voice had regained its smooth composure, but there was fear beneath it now. I am Thomas Harrison Drake. This woman is having some kind of breakdown. Actually, Eleanor said quietly, I have been recording since you came through that door. She pulled her phone from her pocket and held it up. The recording app glowed on the screen, timestamp running. You just confessed to manipulating my father's death. You admitted to destroying multiple women's lives. And you confirmed that Harold Decker is your real name. She met his eyes steadily. You always said I was easy, Harrison. I guess I learned from the best. For a moment, something almost like respect flickered across his face. Then the mask slammed back into place. I want my lawyer, he said. They led him out in handcuffs. Eleanor stood in her kitchen, watching through the window as they put him in the federal vehicle. The man she had thought she loved. The man she had married. The man who had killed her father without ever touching him. Sandra appeared beside her. The recording is perfect. Clear audio, full confession. His lawyers will not be able to explain it away. Eleanor nodded, but she could not speak. The adrenaline was fading, leaving exhaustion and something else in its wake. Something that felt like freedom. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. Is it over? Eleanor looked out at the empty driveway where the federal car had been. She thought about Margaret and Rachel and Diane. She thought about Gloria Patterson, who had fought and won and lost. She thought about all the women whose names she did not know yet. No, she typed back. It is just beginning. She turned away from the window and walked through her house, seeing it as if for the first time. The art Harrison had chosen. The furniture he had selected. The careful arrangements that had made it feel like their home instead of hers. Tomorrow, she would begin dismantling it all. Tomorrow, she would begin rebuilding. But tonight, she sat alone in her father's workshop, surrounded by the tools and furnaces he had loved, and let herself grieve for everything she had lost. Her father. Her trust. 2 years of her life given to a man who had never existed. She picked up a piece of glass her father had made decades ago. A small bird with wings spread wide, catching the light from the window. I see clearly now, she whispered to the empty room. I will not look away again. The bird glittered in her hands, transformed by light into something beautiful. Just as she would be transformed by this terrible trial into something stronger. She did not know what the morning would bring. She did not know how long the legal process would take, or how many other victims would emerge, or what would be left of her life when it was all finally over. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would never be easy again. The morning after Harrison's arrest, Eleanor woke in her childhood bedroom at her mother's assisted living facility. She had not been able to face returning to the house she had shared with him. Not yet, not while his presence still lingered in every room. Vivian was already awake, sitting by the window with a cup of tea, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of rose and gold. Did you sleep? Her mother asked without turning. A little. Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the weight of exhaustion in her bones. I kept hearing his voice. The things he said about father. Vivian was quiet for a long moment. Your father suspected him, you know. Not Harrison specifically, but something. He called me 2 days before he died and said he felt like he was losing his mind. Numbers that should have added up were not adding up. He thought he was getting old, making mistakes. He was not making mistakes. No, he was not. Vivian finally turned to face her daughter. Gerald Mercer was the sharpest man I ever knew. If he said something was wrong, something was wrong. I should have listened. I should have done something. You did do something. You saved me. Vivian's eyes filled with tears. 2 years too late. Eleanor crossed the room and knelt beside her mother's chair. You saved me, she repeated. You did not give up on me, even when I gave up on you. Even when I said terrible things and refused to speak to you. You kept watching. You kept investigating. You sent that text when it mattered most. I was so afraid you would not listen. I almost did not. Eleanor took her mother's weathered hands in her own. When I saw that message, my first thought was that it was some kind of scam. My second thought was that you were trying to manipulate me somehow. She paused. But something in me knew. Something in me had been waiting for permission to see the truth. They sat together in silence as the sun rose higher, mother and daughter reunited by tragedy, bound together by survival. The federal prosecutor called that afternoon. Mr. Decker has retained counsel, Elise Channing reported. A firm from New York that specializes in white-collar defense. They are already filing motions to suppress the recording. Can they do that? They can try. Your phone recording may face challenges, But we also have Sandra's surveillance documentation, the forensic accounting evidence, and testimony from his previous victims. Channing paused. Mrs. Mercer, I need to prepare you for what comes next. This case is going to attract significant media attention. A wealthy businessman, multiple victims across several states, possible connection to a death. The press will be relentless. Eleanor thought about her father's company. The craftspeople who depended on Mercer artisan glass for their livelihoods. The reputation 3 generations had built. Will this hurt the business? It might, initially. But in my experience, the public tends to sympathize with victims who fight back. Your story could become an example of justice prevailing. Another pause. There is something else you should know. We have located 2 more victims. 2 more. Women who came forward after seeing initial news coverage. One from Michigan, one from Tennessee. Same pattern, same operation, same destruction. Channing's voice was heavy. The more we dig, the more we find. Harold Decker has been doing this for at least 15 years. 15 years. 15 years of charming women, gaining their trust, dismantling their lives. How many had there been? How many had never come forward, too ashamed or too broken to seek justice? What do you need from me? Eleanor asked. For now, nothing. Rest, recover, prepare yourself for what is ahead. The arraignment is scheduled for next week. After that, we begin building our case for trial. The arraignment took place on a grey Tuesday morning in a federal courthouse Eleanor had never entered before. She sat in the front row beside her mother, with Sandra positioned nearby, watching as Harrison was brought in wearing an orange jumpsuit instead of his customary expensive suit. He looked smaller somehow. Diminished. The confident businessman who had commanded boardrooms and charmed investors was gone, replaced by a middle-aged man with shadowed eyes and cuffed hands. The charges were read aloud. Wire fraud. Identity theft. Racketeering. Money laundering. Each count a nail in the coffin of the life Harrison had built on lies. His attorney entered a plea of not guilty on all charges. Eleanor had expected this. Channing had warned her that men like Harrison never admitted fault, never accepted responsibility, never stopped fighting even when the evidence was overwhelming. They had spent their entire lives manipulating reality, and they would continue trying to manipulate it until the very end. But as Eleanor watched Harrison scan the courtroom, his eyes passing over her without acknowledgement, she realized something had changed. He no longer frightened her. The power he had held over her, the invisible threads of control and dependency, they had all been severed. She was free. After the arraignment, Sandra introduced Eleanor to Margaret Holloway. Margaret had flown in from Virginia specifically for the hearing. She was a tall woman with steel-grey hair and the weathered hands of someone who had spent years working the land. Her eyes held a wariness that Eleanor recognized, the permanent caution of someone who had learned too late that trust could be weaponized. Mrs. Mercer. Margaret shook her hand firmly. I have been following your case. What you did, recording his confession, that was brave. What I did was desperate. I did not even have the wire in place. I just hit record on my phone and hoped for the best. Margaret smiled, and some of the wariness faded from her expression. Sometimes desperation is the bravest thing of all. They found a quiet coffee shop near the courthouse and talked for nearly 3 hours. Margaret told her story with the careful precision of someone who had recounted it many times before, first to lawyers, then to investigators, then to therapists who tried to help her process the devastation. I met him at a wine industry conference, Margaret said. I was 57 years old, recently divorced, trying to rebuild my life after my husband left me for someone younger. Harrison appeared like an answer to prayers I had not even spoken. He told me about old shipping money, Eleanor said. A family fortune tied up in trusts. With me, it was vineyard investments. He claimed his family had owned wineries in France for generations. Margaret's laugh was bitter. I believed every word. Why would someone lie about something so specific? Because specific lies are more convincing than vague ones. Yes, I understand that now. Margaret stared into her coffee cup. He was patient. So patient. He spent a year courting me before we married. Another year helping me modernize the vineyard operations. He became indispensable, and I let him because I was grateful to have someone capable managing the business side while I focused on the land. And then, very slowly, things started to change. Documents that needed signatures. Accounts that needed restructuring. Power of attorney for emergencies. Margaret looked up. By the time I realized what was happening, there was nothing left to save. How did you survive it? Margaret was quiet for a long moment. Some days I am not sure I did. I lost everything, Mrs. Mercer. Not just money. My sense of self, my ability to trust, my belief that the world made any kind of sense. For 2 years after, I could barely function. But you are here now. You are testifying. Because of women like you. Margaret reached across the table and covered Eleanor's hand with her own. When I heard about your case, when I saw that you had recorded his confession, something in me woke up. All this time, I thought I was the only one foolish enough to fall for his lies. Knowing there were others, knowing you fought back, it made me want to fight too. Eleanor thought about the isolation Harrison had cultivated. The way he had separated her from her mother, from old friends, from anyone who might have seen through his performance. The loneliness was part of the trap. We should not have had to face this alone, she said. No. We should not have. They exchanged phone numbers before parting. Margaret would be staying in town for the trial, and she had already connected with Rachel Ostrowski, who was flying in from Colorado. A network was forming, women who had been destroyed by the same man, finding strength in their shared survival. There is one more thing you should know, Margaret said as they stood to leave. About Diane Pescator. Eleanor felt her chest tighten. Yes. I knew her. We met at a support group for fraud victims, years after Harrison had finished with both of us. She was fragile, but she was fighting. She had found a job, was rebuilding slowly. Margaret's voice dropped. And then Harrison married you. What do you mean? When Diane heard that Harrison had found another victim, that he was doing it all over again, something in her broke. She felt responsible somehow. Like she should have found a way to warn you. Margaret's eyes were bright with unshed tears. She took her life 3 months after your wedding. The weight of it pressed down on Eleanor's shoulders. A woman she had never met, destroyed twice by the same man. First by his theft, then by his continuation. I did not know. How could you? That was the point. None of us knew about each other. He kept us isolated, separate, ashamed. Margaret straightened her shoulders. But not anymore. Never again. The weeks before the trial passed in a blur of preparation. Eleanor met with Channing's team regularly, reviewing evidence, preparing testimony, anticipating the defense's strategies. Harrison's lawyers were aggressive, filing motion after motion to suppress evidence, challenge witnesses, delay proceedings. They painted their client as a legitimate businessman being persecuted by vindictive women. But the evidence was overwhelming. Sandra's investigation had uncovered a paper trail that stretched back over a decade, documenting Harrison's transformation from petty fraudster to sophisticated predator. Bank records showed the systematic transfer of funds through layers of shell companies. Forensic analysis confirmed forged signatures on dozens of documents. Former associates, granted immunity in exchange for testimony, described the operation in damning detail. Curtis Webb, the disbarred attorney who had handled Harrison's paperwork, broke first. Facing charges of his own, he agreed to testify against his former partner in exchange for a reduced sentence. His testimony provided the inside view the prosecution needed, detailing how victims were selected, how trust was cultivated, how assets were extracted. Pamela Reese proved harder to catch. She had fled the country before the arrests, and federal agents were still trying to locate her through international channels. But her absence, rather than helping Harrison's defense, only underscored the organized nature of the operation. He cannot claim he was acting alone, Channing explained during one of their preparation sessions. The network exists. The pattern exists. Every victim tells the same story with different details. The jury will see a predator, not a businessman. Will he testify? His lawyers are still deciding. If he takes the stand, I will destroy him on cross-examination. But if he stays silent, the jury only hears his victims. Channing smiled grimly. Either way, he loses. Eleanor spent hours with the other victims, building the relationships that would sustain them through the trial ahead. Rachel Ostrowski arrived from Colorado, a quiet woman in her 60s who had lost a cattle operation that had been in her family for 4 generations. She spoke little but listened intently, her presence steady and calming. 2 more women emerged from the shadows. Gloria Patterson, the bakery owner from Vermont who had fought Harrison in court years earlier, agreed to testify about the early days of his operation. And a woman named Christine Novak from Michigan, who had nearly married Harrison before discovering his true identity at the last moment, offered to share how she had escaped. Together, they formed something that defied easy description. Not quite a support group, not quite a legal team. Something more like a family, forged in shared suffering, bound by common purpose. He counted on us staying silent, Rachel said during one of their group meetings. He counted on our shame keeping us apart. That shame kept me quiet for years, Gloria admitted. I thought I was the stupid one. The foolish woman who fell for an obvious con. There was nothing obvious about it, Eleanor said firmly. Harrison spent years perfecting his technique. He studied us. He learned our weaknesses. He became exactly what we needed him to be. And we loved him. Christine's voice was barely a whisper. That is the worst part. We actually loved him. The room fell silent. It was the truth none of them wanted to acknowledge, the wound that cut deepest. They had not simply been deceived. They had opened their hearts to a man who did not exist, given their love to a performance, built their futures on a foundation of lies. I still have dreams about him sometimes, Margaret confessed. Not nightmares. Dreams where he is the man I thought he was. Where we are happy together. She laughed bitterly. I wake up and hate myself for missing someone who was never real. Eleanor thought about her own dreams. The Harrison who brought her coffee in bed. The Harrison who held her when she cried about her father. The Harrison who whispered that he loved her in the darkness. All of it false. All of it calculated. Yet the feelings had been real, at least on her side. We loved who we thought they were, she said finally. That love was real, even if he was not. And there is no shame in loving. The shame belongs to him, Vivian added quietly. She had been sitting in the corner, observing. The shame belongs to the man who exploited that love. The women looked at each other, and something passed between them. An understanding. An acceptance. The beginning of healing. The trial began on a Monday morning in early spring. Eleanor arrived at the courthouse with her mother on one side and Sandra on the other. The other victims followed in a quiet procession, their presence a silent statement of solidarity. Reporters lined the steps, calling out questions, cameras flashing, but the women moved past them without comment. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Media in the back rows. Curious observers filling the gallery. And at the defense table, Harrison in a tailored suit, looking for all the world like the sophisticated businessman he had always pretended to be. His eyes met Eleanor's as she took her seat. For a moment, she saw something flicker in his expression. Not remorse. Not fear. Something more like calculation, the predator assessing his prey even now. She held his gaze steadily until he looked away. The prosecution's opening statement laid out the case methodically. 15 years of fraud. At least 8 confirmed victims. Millions of dollars stolen through forgery, manipulation, and systematic exploitation. A criminal enterprise disguised as romance. The defendant did not simply steal money, Channing told the jury. He stole futures. He stole peace of mind. He stole the ability to trust. And in at least one case, he stole a life. The defense countered with a narrative of misunderstanding. Harrison was a legitimate businessman whose relationships had ended badly. The women were bitter, vindictive, seeking to blame others for their own poor financial decisions. The documentation was complex, easily misinterpreted by those without expertise. There is no criminal enterprise, Harrison's lead attorney argued. There is only a man who loved unwisely and is now paying the price for those failed relationships. Eleanor listened to the defense's opening with a growing sense of unreality. They were describing a completely different person, a sympathetic figure who bore no resemblance to the man who had confessed to killing her father without ever touching him. But the jury would see the truth. The evidence would speak for itself. The prosecution called its witnesses in careful sequence, building the narrative piece by piece. Forensic accountants explained the shell companies and hidden transfers. Handwriting experts confirmed the forged signatures. Banking officials described suspicious transaction patterns. Curtis Webb, looking haggard and defeated, testified about his role in the operation, describing how victims were selected and assets extracted. Mr. Decker was very specific about his targets, Webb said under questioning. Recently widowed or divorced. Substantial assets. Isolated from family or friends. And emotionally vulnerable. That was the key. He wanted women who were looking for someone to take care of them. And how did he find these women? Various ways. Society pages. Obituaries. Industry publications. He would research them for months before making contact. By the time he introduced himself, he already knew everything about them. What happened to the money once it was transferred? It moved through a series of accounts, each layer more difficult to trace. Eventually it ended up in offshore holdings that Mr. Decker controlled. Webb paused. I never knew exactly how much was taken in total. My job was paperwork, not accounting. The defense cross-examined aggressively, trying to paint Webb as an unreliable witness seeking to reduce his own sentence. But the damage was done. The jury had heard the operation described from the inside. Then came the victims. Gloria Patterson testified first, her voice steady despite the emotion visible in her face. She described meeting Harrison nearly a decade earlier, falling in love, marrying him, and then watching helplessly as her bakery empire crumbled. He made me feel like I was losing my mind, Gloria said. Documents I was certain I had never signed. Accounts I did not remember opening. He would explain everything so patiently, making me feel like I simply did not understand the complexity of it all. What did you lose? Everything. The bakeries that 3 generations of my family had built. My retirement savings. My house. Gloria's voice wavered. My sense of who I was. Margaret Holloway followed, describing the loss of her vineyard. Then Rachel Ostrowski, speaking quietly about the cattle ranch that had been in her family since before the Civil War. Each story was different in its details but identical in its arc. A vulnerable woman. A charming man. A systematic destruction. When Christine Novak took the stand, the courtroom fell especially quiet. She was the one who got away, the woman who had discovered the truth before Harrison could complete his plan. I found a document in his briefcase, Christine explained. A file with my name on it. Inside were financial records, personal information, a timeline of our relationship with notes in the margins. Her voice trembled. He had written down when I was most vulnerable, when I was most likely to agree to things. He was studying me like I was a project. What did you do? I confronted him. Christine paused. He tried to explain it away at first. Said it was just notes to remember important dates, to be a better partner. But I could see the truth in his eyes. He knew I knew. How did the relationship end? I ran. Changed my phone number, moved to a different city, told no one where I was going. Christine looked directly at Harrison for the first time. I spent 2 years looking over my shoulder, waiting for him to appear. He never did. He had already moved on to someone else. The defense's cross-examinations grew increasingly desperate as the trial progressed. They challenged memories, questioned motives, implied that the women had been willing participants who only cried fraud after the relationships ended. But the pattern was too clear, the evidence too consistent. By the time the prosecution rested its case, the defense had little left to work with. Harrison did not testify. His lawyers had apparently decided that putting him on the stand was too risky. Eleanor would never hear him explain his actions, never watch him try to justify the destruction he had caused. But his silence was its own kind of confession. On the 15th day of the trial, Eleanor Mercer was called to testify. She had prepared for this moment for weeks, rehearsing her testimony, anticipating questions, steeling herself for the experience of facing Harrison across a courtroom. But nothing could truly prepare her for the reality of sitting in the witness box, sworn to tell the truth, with the man who had killed her father watching from 20 feet away. Mrs. Mercer, Channing began gently, please describe how you met the defendant. Eleanor took a breath and began. The gallery opening. Her father's recent death. The charming stranger who seemed to understand her grief perfectly. The whirlwind courtship, the quick marriage, the gradual transfer of control. I was so grateful to have someone helping me, she said. The business overwhelmed me after my father died. Harrison made everything seem manageable. He took care of the finances so I could focus on the creative side of the company. Did you ever question his business decisions? Not at first. He always had explanations that sounded reasonable. And I wanted to trust him. I needed to trust someone. What changed? Eleanor described the text message at the anniversary dinner. The meeting with her mother. The evidence Sandra had compiled. The growing horror as she realized the man she had married was a complete fabrication. When did you learn about your father's death? The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. My mother's investigator discovered that my father had been researching financial irregularities in the company in the weeks before his death. Harrison had been manipulating the accounts, creating problems that stressed my father tremendously. Eleanor's voice remained steady despite the pain. My father had a heart condition. The stress Harrison deliberately created contributed to his cardiac event. Objection. Harrison's attorney was on his feet. Speculation. There is no evidence that the defendant's actions caused Mr. Mercer's death. I will rephrase, Channing said smoothly. Mrs. Mercer, did the defendant ever discuss your father's death with you? Yes. Eleanor looked directly at Harrison. On the night he was arrested, when I confronted him with what I knew, he admitted to manipulating the accounts. He said he created circumstances. He said what my father's body did with those circumstances was his own affair. She paused. He was proud of it. The jury's faces told the story. Shock. Disgust. Horror. Several looked at Harrison with expressions of open revulsion. The defense's cross-examination was surprisingly brief. Harrison's attorney asked a few questions about the timeline, tried to suggest that Eleanor had misunderstood the conversation, implied that grief and stress might have affected her memory. Eleanor answered each question calmly and clearly. She did not waver. She did not break. When she finally stepped down from the witness box, she felt something release inside her. The truth had been spoken. Her father's death had been acknowledged. Whatever happened next, she had done what she came to do. Closing arguments were delivered on a Thursday afternoon. The prosecution's summary was devastating. A decade-long pattern of predation. Multiple victims across multiple states. Millions of dollars stolen. Lives destroyed. And a man who had engineered conditions that contributed to the death of Eleanor Mercer's father. Harold Decker is not a businessman who made mistakes, Channing concluded. He is a predator who hunted vulnerable women with precision and patience. He did not fall into crime. He built a criminal enterprise, complete with accomplices, systems, and exit strategies. He has shown no remorse, accepted no responsibility, and given no indication that he would stop if given the opportunity. The defense closed with appeals to reasonable doubt. The documentation was complicated. The relationships were messy. Bitter ex-wives were not reliable witnesses. The jury should question the motives of women who only came forward after the defendant was already in custody. But the words rang hollow against the weight of evidence. The jury had heard from the victims. They had seen the documents. They had watched Harrison's silent refusal to explain or defend himself. The jury deliberated for 2 days. Eleanor spent the waiting time with the other victims, gathered in a hotel suite near the courthouse. They ordered food they barely ate. They watched television they did not really see. They talked about everything and nothing, filling the silence with words to keep fear at bay. What if they acquit? Rachel asked quietly on the second evening. No one answered. The possibility was too terrible to contemplate. But when the call came that a verdict had been reached, Eleanor felt only calm. Whatever happened next, she had done everything in her power. She had told the truth. She had faced her demons. She had refused to be silent. The courtroom was packed when the jury filed in. Eleanor sat between her mother and Margaret, their hands clasped tightly together. Has the jury reached a verdict? We have, Your Honor. The foreman stood. A middle-aged man with grey hair and kind eyes. He held the verdict form in hands that did not shake. On the charge of wire fraud, we find the defendant guilty. Eleanor heard Margaret gasp softly beside her. On the charge of identity theft, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of racketeering, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of money laundering, we find the defendant guilty. Guilty on all counts. Every single charge. Eleanor watched Harrison's face as the verdicts were read. For just a moment, the mask slipped. She saw fury and fear, and something that might have been disbelief. He had been doing this for 15 years. He had never faced consequences. He had never been stopped. Until now. The sentencing hearing took place 2 months later. The prosecution requested the maximum penalty, citing the severity and duration of the crimes, the number of victims, and the defendant's complete lack of remorse. Victim impact statements were read into the record, including letters from women who had not testified but wanted their voices heard. Eleanor spoke last. "My father built Mercer artisan glass from nothing," she said, standing at the podium, looking directly at the judge. "He spent 40 years creating beauty from raw materials. He believed in craftsmanship and integrity and the value of things built to last." She paused, gathering herself. Harold Decker destroyed things. That was his skill, his craft. He identified beauty and systematically dismantled it. He found women who had something worth taking, and he took everything they had. Another pause. "I cannot get back the 2 years I spent believing in a marriage that never existed. I cannot get back my father, or undo the stress that contributed to his death. I cannot restore what was stolen from Margaret, or Rachel, or Gloria, or any of the other women this man destroyed." She turned to face Harrison directly. "But I can make sure he never does this to anyone else. I can stand here and say, I was a victim, but I am not ashamed. I was deceived, but I fought back. I was broken, but I survived." She looked back at the judge. "I ask the court to impose the maximum sentence. Not for vengeance, but for justice. And for all the women who might be saved by keeping Harold Decker away from society." The judge deliberated for only a few minutes. The defendant has shown no remorse for crimes that span more than a decade. He has destroyed lives, stolen futures, and contributed to at least one death. His criminal enterprise was sophisticated, deliberate, and deeply harmful. The judge paused, her expression grave. "Harold Decker, I sentence you to 34 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole." The courtroom erupted. Media rushed for the doors. The victims embraced each other, tears streaming down their faces. Eleanor's mother gripped her hand so tightly it hurt. Harrison was led away in handcuffs. He did not look back. He did not acknowledge the women he had destroyed, or the justice that had finally caught up with him. He simply disappeared through the door, and the life he had built on lies disappeared with him. In the weeks following the sentencing, Eleanor began the slow process of rebuilding. She returned to Mercer artisan glass for the first time since Harrison's arrest. The workshop was exactly as her father had left it, tools arranged with care, furnaces cold but ready to be relit. She walked through the space slowly, touching the surfaces her father had touched, breathing the air he had breathed. The craftspeople who had worked for her family for decades welcomed her back with quiet warmth. They had noticed changes under Harrison's management, decisions that did not make sense, priorities that seemed wrong. But they had not felt it was their place to question. Now they understood, and their loyalty to the Mercer family only deepened. "We kept the old ways," the head glassblower told her. "Even when Mr. Drake wanted us to cut corners, we remembered what your father taught us." Eleanor spent her first weeks back at the company learning everything she had neglected. The accounts, the contracts, the supplier relationships, the customer base. She had allowed Harrison to handle these things because she had believed herself incapable. Now she discovered that capability was simply a matter of commitment. Walter Hennessy helped her untangle the legal complications. Assets that had been transferred to shell companies were methodically recovered. Forged documents were invalidated. The financial structure Harrison had built to steal her inheritance was dismantled piece by piece. "It will take time," Walter cautioned. "Some of the money may never be recovered. But the core of the business is intact. Your father's legacy survives." Eleanor nodded. Then we build from there. The other victims faced longer roads to recovery. Margaret's vineyard had been sold years ago, the new owners unwilling to sell back at any price. Rachel's ranch was mired in legal complications that would take years to resolve. Gloria had nothing left to recover, only the bitter satisfaction of finally being believed. But something was growing among them. A connection that transcended their shared trauma. A purpose that emerged from their collective pain. "We should do something," Eleanor said during one of their regular gatherings. "Something that helps other women avoid what happened to us." "Like what?" Margaret asked. "Education. Legal support. A network that helps vulnerable people recognize the warning signs before it is too late." Eleanor leaned forward. "We understand how this works now. We know the patterns, the techniques, the vulnerabilities that predators exploit. That knowledge could save others." Rachel nodded slowly. "A foundation." "Yes. A foundation." Eleanor looked around the room at the women who had become her sisters in survival. "We could not save ourselves. But we could save someone else." The Mercer Foundation was established 6 months after Harrison's sentencing. Named for Eleanor's father, it was funded initially by a substantial donation from the recovered assets. Its mission was simple: to protect vulnerable individuals from financial predators through education, legal support, and community building. The foundation grew faster than anyone anticipated. Media coverage of the trial had raised awareness of romance fraud, and victims began reaching out from across the country. Some needed legal help. Others needed emotional support. Still others simply needed to know they were not alone. Eleanor threw herself into the work with a passion that surprised even her. She gave interviews, spoke at conferences, testified before legislative committees about the need for stronger fraud protections. She became a voice for the voiceless, a champion for those who had been too ashamed to fight. "You have changed," her mother observed one evening, watching Eleanor prepare for another public appearance. "I have been changed," Eleanor corrected. "What happened to me, what happened to all of us, it strips away everything you thought you were. What grows back in its place is something different. Something stronger. Something that refuses to be invisible." By the end of the first year, the Mercer Foundation had assisted more than 100 victims of financial fraud. 17 of those cases involved active predation that was stopped before assets could be transferred. 3 resulted in criminal prosecutions. Countless others found healing through the community the foundation created. But Eleanor's greatest satisfaction came from the letters. They arrived almost daily, handwritten notes from women who had recognized themselves in Eleanor's story. Women who had been isolated by charming partners. Women who had signed documents they did not understand. Women who had felt the first stirrings of suspicion and, because of the Foundation's educational materials, trusted those instincts instead of explaining them away. "Dear Mrs. Mercer," one letter read, "I was 3 months into a relationship that felt too perfect. He was kind, attentive, interested in my finances in ways that seemed helpful. Then I attended one of your workshops. I recognized every pattern you described. I ended the relationship that night. Thank you for saving my life." Eleanor kept that letter on her desk. On difficult days, when the work felt overwhelming and the memories threatened to consume her, she would read it again and remember why she had chosen this path. Her relationship with Vivian transformed in ways neither of them had anticipated. The years of estrangement had created distance that took time to bridge. But working together on the foundation, sharing the mission that had emerged from their shared pain, they found new common ground. Vivian's sharp mind and decades of business experience proved invaluable. Eleanor's energy and public presence gave the foundation visibility. "I wasted so much time being angry," Vivian said one afternoon, as they reviewed grant applications together. "I was so focused on the inheritance, on what I thought your father had done wrong, that I pushed away the only family I had left. We both made mistakes." "No. I made mistakes. You were grieving, and I attacked you instead of helping you." Vivian set down her papers. "I will spend the rest of my life trying to make up for that." Eleanor took her mother's hand. "You already have." On the 2nd anniversary of Harrison's sentencing, the foundation held a gala in Eleanor's father's honor. The event was held at the Mercer Artisan Glass Workshop, transformed for one night into a glittering celebration. Glass sculptures created by the company's craftspeople served as centerpieces. A gallery displayed photographs of Gerald Mercer's most famous works. And a silent auction raised funds that would support the foundation's work for years to come. The other victims were there, of course. Margaret had become the foundation's director of victim services. Rachel managed the educational programming. Gloria, despite having no assets to contribute, had become the heart of their community, the one who remembered birthdays and sent flowers when someone was struggling. "Look at what we have built," Margaret said, surveying the crowded room. "From the worst experience of our lives, this. My father would have loved this," Eleanor said. "Not the party. He hated parties. But what it represents. People coming together to create something beautiful. That is what he taught you, is it not? How to create beauty from raw materials." Eleanor smiled. "Yes. I suppose it is." Later that evening, after the guests had departed and the cleanup crews had finished their work, Eleanor walked through the empty workshop alone. The furnaces were cold, the tools arranged with care, the space filled with shadows and memory. She stopped before her father's workbench. His reading glasses still sat where he had left them, the lenses smudged with fingerprints she could not bear to clean away. His favorite tools hung on their hooks, waiting for hands that would never use them again. "I see clearly now, Father," she said softly into the darkness. "I understand what you tried to teach me. Not just about glass. About life. About being strong enough to withstand the fire that transforms you." She picked up a small piece of molten glass that had been cooling in a dish, left over from an earlier demonstration. It was still warm to the touch, still malleable, still capable of becoming whatever she chose to make it. "I will not look away again," she promised. "I will not let others look away either." She carried the glass to her father's workbench and began to shape it. She was not a master craftsman like he had been. Her technique was imperfect, her movements uncertain. But she had learned enough to create something simple. A bird. Wings spread wide. Ready to fly. When she finished, she placed the small sculpture on the windowsill where the morning light would catch it. A companion to the bird her father had made for her mother decades ago. A symbol of everything that had been lost and everything that had been found. Eleanor stood in the workshop as dawn began to lighten the sky. Behind her lay 2 years of horror, betrayal, and pain. Before her stretched a future she had never imagined, filled with purpose and connection and the hard-won wisdom of survival. She had been broken. She had been deceived. She had been used by a man who saw her as nothing more than a mark to be exploited. But she had not been destroyed. She had become something new, something stronger, something that could not be bent or manipulated or dimmed. She had become the woman her father had always believed she could be. And she was only just beginning. The morning light caught the glass bird on the windowsill, transforming it into a prism of color. Eleanor watched the light play across its surface, thinking about all the women who would be saved by the work she had chosen. All the predators who would be stopped. All the lives that would remain whole because someone had finally spoken the truth. Her phone buzzed with a message. A woman from Oregon, asking for help. Suspicious of her new boyfriend. Afraid she might be imagining things. Eleanor began typing her response. "Dear Sarah, you are not imagining anything. Trust your instincts. You are not alone. Here is what I learned, and here is how we can help." She hit send and reached for her coat. There was work to be done, and she was ready. The glass bird caught the light one more time as she walked toward the door. Its wings seemed to flutter in the shifting illumination, ready to take flight. Eleanor smiled and stepped out into the new day.